Welcome to another edition of Daily Airline News, focusing on the loss of UPS 2976. I'm Jeffrey Thomas, and I'm delighted to say once again, joined by my co-host, Richard Godfrey in Frankfurt. Good afternoon to you, Richard.
And good evening to you, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Viewers, this episode is UPS 2976 Cause, episode 267. In two recent episodes, we have covered the history of the MD-11 aircraft and a tribute to those lost in this tragedy by 747 cargo captain Christian van Heist. Our thoughts and prayers for the families and friends of the victims of the crash, both in the air and on the ground, are absolutely felt. In two further episodes, we have presented our analysis of the UPS 2976 crash, the previous flights and the maintenance history. Together, you, the viewers, have made around 700 comments on the UPS crash on the 4th of November 2025 in Louisville, Kentucky. 437 comments discuss the engines and in particular the left engine fire and the pylon, which attaches the left engine to the left wing. 100 comments about fire and 96 comments about the pylon. Richard McCoskey, 1949, says, if you look at the photo of the departed left wing engine at timestamp 4.44, you will see a large torn hole on the right side of the high pressure turbine section just before the rear hot exhaust cone. If an internal explosion occurred here with substantial force, then it is possible that the resulting action-reaction sequence caused the entire left-wing engine to twist to the right. This sudden movement with an additional air drag component could snap off the engine and its mounting pylon, thus releasing ignitable fuel and ripped airborne left-wing debris. This material could then be ingested by the second engine, that's the tail one, causing it to experience successive compressor stalls and thus reduced output thrust. Now, I added that rear engine, but it could also be the right engine as well. Richard?
Yeah, I think it's more likely the rear center engine than the right engine. Could actually be that both were affected.
Yep.
And I think, Jeffrey, you've referred previously to the failure of the high-pressure turbine disc on American Airlines Flight 383 on the 28th of October 2016, where the captain aborted the takeoff from Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Now, that was a Boeing 767 and powered by two General Electric CF6-80C-2B6 engines. In the case of UPS 2976, an MD-11, it was powered by three General Electric CF6-80C-2D1F engines, but they're all from the same family. And I think you've identified a number of similar engine failures over the years. Give us an overview, please.
Yes, there's been a number. Dynamic Airways Flight 405, British Airways Flight 2276, Korean Air 2708, British Air Tours 28M, United Flight 328, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380, Pacific Western Airlines Flight 501, United 1175, Qantas QF32. We spoke to Richard de Crespigny about that one the other night. United Airlines again, Flight 232, and Tibet Airlines Flight 9833. Now, Richard, Old Geezer Productions, we've heard from him before. He says, for me, the big question is what happened internally to cause the left engine to fail so violently and catastrophically, and is this the kind of violent disintegration to be expected in an engine failure? Good point. Next question would be the violent impact of high-velocity engine parts being capable of destroying that part of the wing, proximal to the engine and thus to make it appear that the pylon failed. I think it is most likely the left engine failed because the left pylon failed, and it was ballistic damage and high velocity engine debris that caused the pylon to fail. I also think these engine debris likely severely damaged the entire left wing and its associated control surfaces and systems, rendering the aircraft out of control under the best of circumstances. It also appears to me that other further ranging debris from the disintegrating engine were ingested, disabling the centre engine and possibly the right engine too. Well, we just mentioned that. I'd be very interested to know what your take is on this. So, Richard.
Yeah, well, stepping back for a moment and going through the Aviation Safety Network database, they've recorded 1,142 accidents due to engine failure since 1926 up to the most recent crash of UPS 2976, an average of 11.4 engine failures per year for the last 99 years of aviation. We're showing a screenshot with a table with an overview of these engine failures, and there are many possible reasons why an engine fails. In 27% of the cases, it wasn't just one engine that failed, it was all engines on the aircraft that were lost. An engine fire occurred in 10% of the cases, an uncontained failure in 8% of the cases, and an engine separation in 6% of the cases. The FAA did a study of obviously American accidents, and they went through 676 uncontained rotor events, of which 93 showed significant damage, but nevertheless resulted in a safe landing of the aircraft. And out of the 676 cases study, only 15 were fatal. That's only 2%. So this doesn't happen very often. In the case of UPS 2976, there was an engine fire and a structural failure. The pylon and engine separated together, and there was wing damage, and there was certainly loss of control and a loss of power in at least one other engine. The last accident with a dual engine failure was on the 9th of February 2024 near Naples Airport in Florida. That involved a Bombardier CL600. Now, there is still no final report on that one from the NTSB, but there is a court case running against GE, the engine manufacturer, and against Standard Aero, who are responsible for the engine maintenance. And the court case alleges corrosion of engine components. Now, you ask the key question, what happened internally to cause the left engine to fail? We cannot definitively say what caused the left engine to fail or detach. What we can say is that the left engine and pylon detached during takeoff, and this event is a critical causal factor in the crash. The underlying mechanism, whether it was a mechanical failure, a structural failure, foreign object damage, maintenance defect, or other reasons, that remains under investigation. I find it interesting that the Aviation Safety Network has categorized the UPS crash as primarily an engine separation event. The second question you ask, would the violent impact of high-velocity engine parts be capable of destroying that part of the wing proximal to the engine? And the answer is quite clearly yes. High velocity liberated engine parts absolutely can destroy the section of the wing structure near the engine. And this is one of the most serious hazards of an uncontained engine failure. The high pressure spool is a 14-stage high pressure compressor and a 2-stage high pressure turbine. And it's spinning at a rotational speed, which is called N2. And at full thrust on takeoff, this is around 10,070 RPM. And the CF6 specification table covering the CF6-80C family of engines gives the mechanical maximum data for the fan RPM N1 at 3,854 RPM, and for the N2 compressor maximum RPM at 11,055 RPM. The third question you ask, which failed first, the engine or the pylon? We're showing a screenshot, and that is a key question which we try to answer. Did the uncontained engine damage cause the pylon to fail? Or did the pylon structural failure cause the engine damage? Or did they both happen simultaneously? We're showing in the screenshot the fire continuing after rotation. In the picture, you can see that the nose of the aircraft is high up in the air, and you can see that the screenshot was taken from a video beside the runway at taxiway marker to UPS 9. And that is taken from a service road in the airport from behind the aircraft and off to the side. The screenshot at the bottom is taken further away and is closer to a side-on view. Again, the nose of the aircraft is high in the air. Now we're showing another screenshot with the position of the aircraft at V1 and the location where the cowling and the engine were found. And these three positions line up in a straight line, which I think is an important clue. And the airport service road where the video was taken is marked in red. And the position of UPS 9 taxiway sign is also marked. And the left engine problem starts first and before the engine and the pylon separated from the wing. The next screenshot, the third one we're showing, it has the point where the engine problems start. And we derive that from the ADS-B data, which we have from the runway roll. And the acceleration starts to decrease from this point onwards, where the engine problems start. And of course, acceleration starts to decrease because the thrust starts to decrease. And at V1, which was still achieved, the thrust was down from its peak level by 38%, down to a level of 62%, based on the acceleration pattern. And that happened between 25 seconds into the roll and 34 seconds into the takeoff roll. And V1 is reached after 37 seconds, and the thrust picks up a little bit to a level of 74% of the maximum. And that occurs between 34 and 42 seconds into the roll. And the takeoff in total is 500 meters, that's 1,637 feet, longer than usual for a maximum takeoff weight. And the duration of the takeoff roll from tow selection is 5 seconds longer than usual. And the fourth and final question you ask, were liberated engine parts ingested by the other engines? And I think the answer to that is that the decrease in thrust by more than 33%, one third of, i.e., 1 out of 3 engines, indicates that more than one engine was affected, but only minimally initially. The single engine failure still leaves a sufficient margin for at least a climb gradient of 0.3% with the landing gear still down. The further decrease in thrust by impacting the thrust level from the second center engine, possibly even the third right engine, resulted in the aircraft failing to maintain a positive climb gradient. So that 0.3% margin was simply dissolved.
Richard, I think for those folks that are not necessarily completely up to date with or completely across engines, what we're looking at here is a major engine failure of one of the discs that actually holds the blades. This is what happened on QF32, where the 200 kilo disc that held these high pressure turbine blades shattered into three, with the force that one of the parts of the disc went through the wing from bottom to top, releasing fuel. So it penetrated the entire wing box at the bottom and at the top. And I think that's what we're talking about here with this MD-11. Rather than just losing a few blades, it's the disc that holds the blades that appears to have shattered.
Yeah, when you consider the engine is over 6,000 kilos in weight, each one, then there are some very heavy items within that engine
Yeah.
in the low pressure and the high pressure areas. And there are loads and loads of blades, and there are several discs. And they found pieces of the engine, I think, all around the runway area.
And of course, also for viewers too, to perhaps ease your mind, when an aircraft loses a blade, typically there's containment in the engine around the blades, and that loss is contained within the engine. What we're talking about here, obviously, is an uncontained, where it gets away from the engine itself. Anyway, the YouTuber 999, if the engine is supposed to detach from the pylon in the event of a fire, then why are there even fire handles in the cockpit or extinguishers on the engines? Are you suggesting the fire handles are to jettison the engine away from the aircraft? This doesn't make sense. No, I think he's misunderstood. But Joe Costa 1298, I should say, comes back and says, Richard and Jeffrey, thank you. I'm still very interested to know how an engine is designed to release from the wing in such a case as this. Is this something the pilots initiate? Does it happen automatically? Lots of questions in my mind about how this is accomplished. Details, 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 please. I'm extremely interested to hear it from yourselves and not from an AI source. Thank you. We don't rely on AI, I can assure you.
And we are real human beings.
Exactly, despite what people say. Yes.
The technology used is called fuse pins, or sometimes referred to as engineered shear pins. They're actually used on all Boeing aircraft from the 737 right through to the 787, and all Airbus aircraft from the A300 right through to the A380. So engine pylons use fuse pins, which are engineered to carry the full engine load in normal operation, but fail in a controlled way under extreme overload. So, for example, if there's a severe uncontained rotor burst, or a military level damage, or a massive bird strike, or crash forces from an impact. And to give you the details, as you asked, we'd have to go aircraft by aircraft through the 787, the A330, the 737 MG, the A350, and describe the exact pylon pin locations, the load paths, and the failure sequencing. I think that's actually quite a long paper, which we can consider doing. The fire case is handled differently. There are engine nacelles with firewalls, and there are dual fire bottles and fire detection and extinguishing systems. And the pylon has fireproofing requirements, and they're defined in FAR CS 25 in section 1193, 1195, and 1197. And the pylon and wing structure must survive fire long enough for the crew to respond. And they're not designed to detach. In the UPS 2976 case, there was both an uncontained engine failure and a pylon structural failure. And the combination of the uncontained engine failure, engine fire, and then the pylon structural failure results in the following. Number one, a risk of major asymmetric wing lift and loss of control, which is what we observe. The risk of fuel tank rupture and hence fire fed by fuel, and that is also what we observe. There's also risk of injuries on the ground, and that unfortunately happened. And it also undermines the containment of fuel, hydraulics, and electrical lines. And when electrics and hydraulics and fuel all mix, then you have an explosive combination.
Now, Richard, Chris Whittington, 3355. UPS has a history of taking very good care of their aircraft. However, this aircraft had 528 entries in the FAA Service Difficulty Reporting System. I strongly suspect cyclic failure may have played a role in this tragic accident. The aircraft had more than 92,888 hours on its airframe and more than 20,200 cycles. The engine, pylon and spar of the aircraft are areas of intense interest. This is a reason 14 CFR Part 121 Section 1115 limits transport category aircraft to 60,000 hours or 20,000 total cycles. While these can be extended with appropriate maintenance programs, the FAA started focusing in 1991 on fatigue critical structures. Engine pylons is on the list. The MD-11F had ADs concerning engine pylons early on. This airframe had significant history of corrosion and cracking of its wings and related structures. See FAA 2006 25850, Directorate Identifier 2006 NM128AD and AD 2007-0704, associated with docket number FAA 2006 25850 and Directorate Identifier 2006 NM128AD. That's interesting stuff, Richard.
Yeah, and someone who's done their homework quite clearly. So in my view, there was an uncontained left engine failure, which revealed a weak spot in the pylon structure. And that could well be, as you mentioned, due to a critical fatigue. The ensuing fire and engine and pylon separation caused debris flying off in all directions, and I am sure included ingestion into the center tail engine. There is a momentary flash to be seen in one of the videos of the fire on the runway.
Mm. Of course, we should also mention too that the point that's made by Chris is valid. The only thing is that if UPS and other airlines, of course, replace everything according to FAA directives, ADs, SBs, and are replacing all the components at their lifetime limit, then these issues shouldn't be an issue.
Exactly.
Now, Richard, Civil Engineer 747 raises a very interesting comment relating to what I was talking about with the landing accidents of the MD-11. And he says the MD-11 had LSAS because of the handling issues. Worth a mention. Well, it certainly is, and you've done some work on that, Richard.
Yeah, so the longitudinal stability augmentation system on the MD-11 is a pitch axis stability augmentation system. And because the MD-11 was designed with a smaller horizontal stabilizer compared to its predecessor, the DC-10, in order to reduce drag and weight, the aircraft inherently reduced natural pitch damping and stability margins in certain flight regimes. The LSAS compensates for that by providing automatic stabilizer trim and elevator inputs or stabilizer inputs, and pitch attitude hold and damping to maintain stability, particularly important during critical phases of takeoff and climb or descent or high angle maneuvers. And because the MD-11 has a relatively smaller tailplane and thus less inherent pitch stability margin, the LSAS is quite a critical system. So if the LSAS is compromised, it's malfunctioning or overridden or trimmed incorrectly or outside its normal envelope, then the pitch control response and stability can be significantly degraded. And we do not actually know the LSAS status or whether there were any warnings in the cockpit or what the trim state was. It'd be interesting to see if the stabilizer position records are included in the preliminary report. The LSAS, which is designed for normal operation of the aircraft, may not handle very well in extreme asymmetries like we observed during this crash flight. And in our scenario with an engine detachment on UPS 2976, this could be particularly relevant.
So ILAN 6987, NTSB leader Todd Inman worded it like this: the pylon is still attached. Let me clarify. The pylon was attached at the time that it disengaged from the aircraft. Also, he added, subsequently, there could be damage that occurred upon its impact with the terrain. So it looks like to me the pylon stayed attached. Correct me if I am wrong. Second point, the commitment to fly at V1 is not written in stone. I saw it was done before with damage to brakes and wheels, but it was done with passengers on board. Richard, can you comment on that?
I'm sure the NTSB has got it right, and they are very careful with their wording. The pylon was attached at the time that it disengaged from the aircraft. The next question, of course, is why did the pylon disengage from the aircraft? And I think you're absolutely correct to focus on the very careful wording from the board member, Todd Inman, because he is very precise and what he says is very significant. I also think that right now, nobody outside the investigation knows why the pylon disengaged from the aircraft. We know for sure the NTSB are pulling the job cards, going through the maintenance records, and they've also requested an exemplar aircraft with the same engine configuration so they can test it. And they are also analyzing all the components they've recovered in the lab, and they're looking at all possible failure causes, metallurgical analysis and structural analysis. They're looking into the hardware and the maintenance error possibilities. They're looking into fire and thermal damages, into the aerodynamic loads, and I'm sure they're also looking at design related questions. And I guess the thing they have in mind is that anything about the MD-11 engine mounts and pylon design that makes it vulnerable under certain failure modes. And that's where the exemplar aircraft, the FDR data, and a detailed finite element and loads analysis will provide answers. At this point, we cannot say which of these is the cause, and anything more specific would be speculation. And the only solid and on the record point we have is that they have some form of cause or issue or concern in the left engine, the pylon, and the attachment area. And they're treating it as a high priority focus for their teardown and metallurgical work.
Mm. Bill Manning, M5I. There are several aspects to this crash that are still quite baffling, not the least of which is why we have not seen other than the one vehicle on the taxiway camera footage of the takeoff roll. Surely there were several security operational cameras, tower and other airport buildings that could have covered the incident runway. This is crucial because it is looking more and more like the number one engine failure and subsequent separation was a lot more complex and damaging than the one video suggests, and that clip is not complete and starts well into the takeoff roll. My initial guess looking at this is the number two was foddered, bad enough to fail at some point late in the roll, and this is what doomed the flight. The slight track to the left coupled with the roll to the left side is suggestive, but not at all conclusive to me that number three was still operating at impact, unless some kind of significant control failure had occurred. Now, a reply from Padre John Ruffle. The NTSB reported that they are in possession of runway CCTV footage, quite possibly high definition, but they are not releasing it at this time. That's totally understandable. Richard, perhaps you can comment on those two comments.
Yeah. So, first of all, foreign object damage, FOD, is only one possibility. There could be alternative scenarios. And the underlying mechanism, mechanical failure, structural failure, foreign object damage, maintenance defect, that's all under investigation. And the airport and runway CCTV is, of course, primary evidence. The released video was taken from a personal mobile phone and not from the official airport CCTV. And it is entirely expected and appropriate that the NTSB are withholding the runway footage at this stage. The NTSB almost never releases raw operational video until the factual report phase, and sometimes not at all if it contains any protected security sensitive information. You have to bear in mind that the NTSB are currently interviewing witnesses and ground crew and ATC and engineers and other involved parties. And if they were to publicly release the CCTV, this could bias these interviews. And high definition CCTV of an accident may well be an incredibly powerful and helpful source, but it is also deceptively incomplete. Camera perspectives hide loads or forces or structural failures. Smoke and fire timing can appear misleading. Engine rotation speeds and aircraft speeds cannot be reliably judged from video solely. If released early, the footage generates a tidal wave of speculation, and that can actively harm the investigation. And that is why, whenever we do screenshots, we geolocate the position of the camera used in that screenshot. And that's why we use a combination of multiple camera views of the same aircraft position from different perspectives. Because once you have more than one camera, for example, we showed the left and right side of the aircraft just before it crashed, or we've taken two different perspectives of the fire on the runway in this episode. That is important because then you narrow down the error in the camera perspective.
Mm. Yes, it's a bit of a tricky business. Cameras, different angles and different perspectives, and yes, you're absolutely right, Richard.
Yeah.
So JP Cleary 11, thank you to you both for your videos. You have made a nervous flyer a little more comfortable. Just wondering if dual engine aircraft need to demonstrate they can take off with just a single engine. Why wouldn't this MD-11 take off with its number 2 engine and any if no thrust produced by the number 3 engine? Yeah, I think that's about right.
I think I understand what JP is getting at.
Yeah.
And it's a certification issue. Certification requires a one engine inoperative, an OEI takeoff. And it doesn't require a two engine inoperative takeoff be performed. And takeoff performance is based on the fact that the remaining engines are at their full rated thrust and not a partial thrust. So what we have here is the left engine inoperative and actually separating from the aircraft, and a reduced thrust in the center or perhaps even the right engine. And that is way beyond the certification requirements.
And that's just to explain too, again, to those folks who aren't necessarily aerodynamicists, a 747 or an A380 4-engine aeroplane must take off on 3 engines. DC-10, MD-11, Lockheed TriStar they're a 3-engine aircraft, they must take off on 2 engines. But a 777, A350, 737, A320 twin-engine aeroplanes must take off on 1 engine. And that's why if you're in a twin-engine aeroplane, you take off like a rocket. And that's because the thrust-to-weight ratio is so great that the aircraft can take off on just 1 engine. So, Michael Barber, 5651, I have a feeling the roll over to the left side is just a tip stall from insufficient velocity lift. The asymmetric power contributed. I'm sure the pilot was pulling on that yoke to try and clear those buildings. Richard.
Yeah, I'm sure he was. the left engine failed and caught fire during the takeoff roll. So then the left engine and pylon separated from the wing, which is a structural failure. And then there was a loss of control while still on the ground because the aircraft veered to the left on the runway and used up all the available runway and the overrun area and needed it all to get airborne. There was also a loss of lifting integrity, in other words, a loss of the aircraft ability to produce adequate or symmetric lift. And then there was an unintended loss of control in flight. And the aircraft, as you mentioned, rolled over to the left with the left wing down and the right wing up. And we do not know which flight controls were damaged and which were still working. And I'm sure, quite sure, the pilots were doing everything possible to try and save the aircraft and save the situation. But unfortunately, it crashed.
As our colleague Christian Van Heist said in his tribute, he was sure the pilots were doing everything they possibly could, and he said there was nothing that he could suggest that they could have done to save the aircraft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a real tragic
Yeah.
accident.
Absolutely. Richard, look, thank you so much for this fabulous analysis and answering those questions from our viewers and their perspectives on the cause. Of course, we're yet to wait for the NTSB, their preliminary report in, well, it'll probably be about 2 weeks away, won't it?
Yeah, but they may need a bit longer because this is quite a complicated crash and a lot of homework needs to be done, going through all the maintenance data and so on.
Yep.
I think it could take a couple of months before we see a preliminary report.
Yes, we will get the 30-day report giving us the simple facts or the basic facts, but it may
Yeah,
not go into the detail that we need. But again, thank you very much indeed, Richard, for all your work on this.
you're very welcome.
Viewers, we'll be back tomorrow with more of your questions on this terrible crash. So we look forward to your company, and do please subscribe to us. Please do like us. Please keep those wonderful comments coming, and also those fabulous questions. We do really appreciate them. They're great, although they do challenge us from time to time. So we do look forward to your company tomorrow, and wherever you are in the world, please do enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you.